Former U.S. President Donald Trump has been commenting on his hush money trial, saying he's the only presidential candidate in history to be gagged. He claimed the judge, Meghan, had taken away his right to free speech after he was denied appeal to modify a court-imposed gag order. The trial resumed today at the Manhattan court in New York. The former president is facing 34 felony counts of falsified business records and has pleaded not guilty to all the charges.
This judge has taken away my constitutional right to free speech. I am the only presidential candidate in history to be gagged. They don't want me talking. This whole trial, in quotes trial, is rigged. And by taking away my freedom of speech, this highly conflicted judge is rigging the presidential election of 2024, just like, here we go again, 2020. This is a different form of rigging, but they're doing it with prosecutors and judges. It's all about election interference. It's all about hurting Joe Biden's political opponent. But you know what's happening? My poll numbers are the highest they've ever been because the people of America get it. They see the scam, they see what's happening, and they're putting their vote in our camp. We're going to have the biggest election victory in the history of our country, and November 5th is the single biggest and most important day it will be in the history of the USA. It's election day. We're going to get Biden out of the White House. We're going to get him out fast. Crooked Joe Biden would say constantly that he ran because of Charlottesville. We know that's not true. And in any case, he's done a really terrible job because Charlottesville is like a peanut compared to the riots and anti-Israel protests that are happening all over our country. Right now, it's a disaster. There's never been a time like it in the United States of America, and it's Crooked's fault because he sends the wrong message every single time. And that includes what happened with Russia and Ukraine, that includes October 7th, and that certainly includes a bad message on inflation, where he has launched inflation at levels never seen before. The fact is that Crooked Joe hates Israel and he hates the Jewish people. There's no question about that. And if Jewish people are going to vote for Joe Biden, they have to have their head examined. He's a disaster for Israel. The problem is that he hates the Palestinians also, and even more so, and he just doesn't know what to do. He's a confused man. He can't put two sentences together. He doesn't have a clue. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know he's alive, and he's our president. We have to end it. November 5th, we're going to end it.
Well, the United Nations is alarmed by the extreme security situation in Lebanon. UN Deputy Spokesperson Farhan Haq says many people have had to flee villages following daily exchange of fire across the Blue Line. He adds that the United Nations interim force in Lebanon is working to de-escalate the violence in the country that has left many people killed and others injured.
The daily exchanges of fire across the Blue Line are deeply concerning, profoundly impacting towns and villages on both sides. Many people have been displaced, injured, and killed, including today. The United Nations interim force in Lebanon is working continuously to decrease tensions with hundreds of daily activities aimed at de-escalating situations and assisting local communities within its mandate. The ultimate solution can only be political and diplomatic. We urge all parties to reaffirm their commitment to the cessation of hostilities and to upholding their obligation under Resolution 1701.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has concluded a 5-day tour of Europe after visiting France, Serbia, and Hungary. This tour marks his visit to the first visit to Europe in 5 years amid trade tensions and geopolitical turmoil. It marks the 60th anniversary of the diplomatic relations between China and France as well, and the 75th of those with Hungary. The trip also coincided with the 25th anniversary of the NATO bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade during Serbia's war on Kosovo. Let's get more on this, and joining us is DW correspondent Chiponda Chimbelu. Great to see you. Why was the Chinese President Xi Jinping in Europe this time?
Well, Chinese President Xi Jinping made stops in France, Serbia, and Hungary during his trip. And in terms of timing, France and China were commemorating 60 years of bilateral relations. And the Chinese leader met with French President Emmanuel Macron and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. In Serbia, this week marked 25 years since the U.S. bombs struck the Chinese embassy in Belgrade. The accidental bombing was part of NATO's aerial bombardment to stop what was the then Federal Republic of Yugoslavia's ethnic cleansing campaign against Kosovar Albanians. Serbia is also an important ally for Beijing in its Belt and Road initiative. Together with Hungary, the two share closer relations with China than other European countries. So Hungary is Beijing's closest partner in the EU at a time of heightened trade tensions between the bloc and China.
And so what are the sticking points between the EU-China relations?
Well, when it comes to trade, one of the main sticking points is the market access that European products in China have. And here in Europe, it's also about whether Chinese-made products have an unfair advantage over Chinese ones because of Beijing's subsidies. Now, last year, the EU announced an inquiry looking into whether Beijing's subsidies for electric vehicles are giving Chinese-made EVs an unfair advantage. And in April, Brussels made another announcement in a probe to investigate whether Beijing may be favoring its domestic producers when procuring medical devices. Now, these investigations could lead to tariffs on some Chinese products. And in terms of geopolitics, Brussels is concerned about China supplying Russia with dual-use parts that could be used by the Russian military in the war with Ukraine. The bloc wants Beijing to use its influence to contribute to a resolution of the war.
And just how significant was President Xi's visit to Europe?
Well, for Beijing, the trip was really about tapping into the disagreements and the competition within Europe to deepen ties with some countries. Now, if we look at France, French companies have not been as successful as their German peers in getting their cars and chemicals onto the Chinese market. So this was an opportunity for China to improve its trade relations with France. And Hungary, of course, is an important economic partner. Chinese electric battery maker CATL is building a €7 billion manufacturing plant in Hungary. Budapest has been intensifying economic ties with Beijing, while other EU countries speak of decoupling and de-risking. Also, both Hungary and Serbia are pro-Russia, of course. So for Beijing, this trip was really about tapping into those foreign policy differences in Europe to deepen ties with strategic partners.
Chipunda, thank you so much for that. So let's take you to the United Kingdom now, where the UK economy has emerged from recession as gross domestic product rose 0.6% in the first quarter, above the 0.4% estimate, beating expectations, according to official figures from the Office for National Statistics released today. The data from the ONS shows that in output terms, the services sector, crucial to the UK economy, grew for the first time since the first quarter in 2023. The 0.7% growth was mainly driven by the transport services industry, which saw its highest quarterly growth rate since 2020. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, whose Conservative Party recently suffered significant losses at local elections, welcomed the news, saying the economy has turned a corner. Meanwhile, some analysts say the UK's escape from recession is a rather hollow victory because the big picture remains one of an economy struggling with stagnation, as poor productivity and high economic activity limits the growth potential. Although there's no official definition of a recession, 2 straight quarters of negative growth is widely considered a technical recession. From massive flooding in southern Brazil has risen to 107. Rescue crews are still searching to find 136 people still missing in the deadly disaster. Homes and infrastructure have been damaged in the floods, according to local media reports. Over Media reports over 1.4 million residents were affected, with more than 164,000 losing their houses. Some 67,000 people have had to evacuate their shelters. The National Institute of Meteorology reported that the situation is expected to deteriorate further and warned about heavy rains and more flooding in the region today. The Brazilian president says he has held crisis talks with the state's governor, promising to reduce the suffering caused by the region's worst climate disaster in history. And Iranians are voting in a runoff for the remaining seats in parliament after conservative candidates dominated the elections in March. The 290-member legislature, however, plays a secondary role in governing the country. In March, conservatives won 200 of 245 seats, with more moderate candidates taking the other 45. Voters in 22 constituencies across the country are expected to elect 45 representatives from a pool of 90 candidates, 15 of whom are considered moderate. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who casted his votes shortly after the poll opened today, urged people to head to polling stations as voter apathy remains high since the last parliamentary elections in 2020, in an indication of widespread discontent. And after everybody's expectations were held high, one of the most popular couples in the world, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, are finally here in Nigeria. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex arrived in Nigeria for their 72-hour tour to promote the Invictus Games. They arrived this morning in Abuja, the nation's capital, aboard a British Airways flight, which was slightly delayed after the scheduled pilot went sick and a replacement had to be quickly arranged. They were received by some Nigerian officials at the Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport in Abuja. This afternoon, the couple visited the defense headquarters, where they were given the traditional military welcome.
That's a motorcade of Harry and Meghan driving into the defense headquarters in Abuja. This is the couple's first visit to Nigeria, and it's at the instance of the Chief of Defense Staff, General Christopher Musa.
Ready for inspection, Your Highness.
At the defense headquarters, Harry inspected the Guard of Honor. And the couple were given the traditional military welcome. Earlier in the day, the couple visited the Lightway Academy in Abuja to promote mental health among teens. Their visit is to primarily promote the Invictus Games after Harry met the Nigerian team and the Chief of Defense Staff, General Christopher Musa, at last year's competition in Düsseldorf, Germany. The couple is due to meet with injured service members at a military hospital in Kaduna. They'll also attend a training session for the charity organization Nigeria Unconquered, which collaborates with the Invictus Games, as well as a reception where military families will be honored. On Saturday, the couple will attend a training session for the organization Nigeria Unconquered and a reception hosted by the Chief of Defense Staff in honor of military families. In the afternoon, Meghan will co-host an event of women in leadership with Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, Director General of the World Trade Organization. On Sunday, the couple will attend a basketball clinic with Giants of Africa, a cultural reception, and a polo fundraiser for Nigeria Unconquered.
And Chad's military ruler, Mohamed Debi, has been declared the official winner of the presidential elections. This poll outcome means his family's 34-year rule will continue. According to the state's election body, General Debi won 61.3% of the vote, while his closest rival, Prime Minister Success Masra, won 18.5%. During the victory speech, the 40-year-old leader promised to diligently serve the Chadian people and not just those who voted for him. General Debi was installed as Chad's leader by the military after his father, Idris Debi, was killed during the battle with rebel forces in April 2021. South Africa's Constitutional Court is set to decide on an appeal questioning former President Jacob Zuma's eligibility to run in this month's election. The court in Johannesburg is hearing the appeal filed by the country's election body after a lower court ruled that Mr. Zuma could run for office. Earlier, the Independent Electoral Commission barred him from contesting in the May 29 poll. The 82-year-old is fronting a new opposition party that has become a potential disruptor in the general election, while his party, Umkhonto weZizwe, is not expected to win enough votes to return the former leader to the presidency. It could cut into the vote share of the dominant governing African National Congress Party and determine who will be the country's next leader. In the South African constitution, the president is elected by members of parliament. May 29's election is seen as a race that could tilt the balance of the ANC-led parliament. In Johannesburg, Innocent Simosa has more details on this development.
It's always good to talk to you. Indeed, Jacob Zuma versus the Independent Electoral Commission has reached its highest level at the Constitutional Court. So there are legal questions, political questions, and of course, electoral questions. This is by far one of important moment in South African election. Former President Jacob Zuma going to the Constitutional Court to try to make sure that he can be on the MK party list to go to Parliament. But just to give you a background, there's massive legal implications here and constitutional case. The relationship between constitutional rights, political rights, and also electoral rights. So when you're looking at the law, we ask ourselves, why is the Constitutional Court sitting and listening to this case? But just to give our viewers a background, that there were 3 cases, 2 of which MK party has won. The third one was won by the MK party at the Electoral Court, but appealed, of course, to the Constitutional Court. Now, the first one was speaking about the registration of MK party by the ANC. They were complaining that the ANC does not own MK party, and the MK party won that one. The second one was about trademark, speaking about the logo and the name. And the third one, it's where we find ourselves today, that speaks about the, where former President Jacob Zuma is trying to make sure that he can be on the MK party list to go to Parliament. So by law, we understand that everybody has to send their, their candidate list, the name of the people that they want to represent that particular party in Parliament. So the IEC is of a view that former President Jacob Zuma should not be in Parliament simply because he was charged by the courts for more than 15 months. It was about 15 months, of course. So, in fact, Section 47(1)(e) of the Constitution speaks about, it outlines who is eligible to be a member of Parliament. So in this case, we find ourselves with an issue where former President Jacob Zuma had to serve 3 months as opposed to 12 months. Because he was pardoned by President Cyril Ramaphosa because there were issues, he was not feeling well. So now the argument is that the time he served, it was 3 months, not more than 12 months, which then speaks to whether or not the time that he served is equivalent to what he was essentially charged. But we come to understand today, after the Constitutional Court, of course, earlier disqualifying former President Jacob Zuma from going to Parliament, it's also important to remind our viewers that former President Jacob Zuma was not disqualified by the Independent Electoral Commission. He was disqualified by the Constitutional Court.
We head to Kenya now, where chairperson of the African Union Commission, Musa Faki Mahamat, is urging African countries to optimize the use of existing continental assets to boost local fertilizer production and deliver quality products to African farmers. He was speaking during the session on Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit 2024. He stressed that African countries depend mostly on imported fertilizers, which makes them very expensive for the farmers. In 2006, the African Union adopted the Abuja Declaration on Fertilizer for the African Green Revolution, aimed to reverse the trend of poor productivity of the African soils. Host Kenyan President William Ruto emphasized that Africa has 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land, which is the central potential for economic growth.
Some African countries produce fertilizers, but we depend mostly on imported fertilizers, making them very expensive for our farmers. Yet, the African Center for Fertilizer Development, based in Zimbabwe, has been in existence since the 1980s. We must optimize use of such existing continental assets to boost local fertilizer production and deliver quality fertilizers to African farmers at affordable prices. This is imperative if we are to improve the continent's agricultural sector, key for our food sovereignty and security. These investments should also be reflected in our national budgets.
Africa has 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land. That potential is immense. And unlocking that potential is central to our economic growth. Because unlocking that potential not only gives us an opportunity to feed our people and this continent, but also it gives us an opportunity for us to engage in agro-processing, value addition, manufacturing with agro-based raw materials.
The independent expert on the situation of human rights in Somalia is calling on stakeholders in the country to prioritize dialogue on positive developments that would encourage the promotion of democracy, rule of law, and human rights. Isha Daifan is wrapping up her third visit to the Horn of Africa country. Her latest visit saw her spend 5 days in Mogadishu, where she had a wide-ranging series of meetings with representatives from the federal government of Somalia, civil society, the African Union Transition Mission in Somalia, and various United Nations agencies, funds, and programs.
During my meetings with authorities, I discussed the progress achieved by the government since my last visit in November 2023 and challenges encountered to advance the promotion and protection of human rights in Somalia. On the efforts by the government, I commended the successful vote on amendments to the first 4 chapters of the Provisional Constitution of the Federal Government of Somalia by members of the bicameral Federal Parliament. However, I expressed concerns about the lack of consensus among political actors regarding the changes. I call on all parties to prioritize dialogue to build consensus in order to safeguard these positive developments towards enhancing the promotion of democracy, rule of law, and human rights in Somalia.
And back in Nigeria, the Center for Economic Policy Analysis and Research, CEPA, and the University of Lagos have held a public lecture on macroeconomic policy and effective management of public finance for sustainable development in the country. At the event, participants discussed ways to contribute positively to Nigeria's economic development in the midst of some fiscal challenges faced by government, which include debt sustainability and budgetary imbalance.
The Center for Economic Policy Analysis and Research of the University of Lagos is contributing to current economic conversations through this public lecture on macroeconomic policy and effective management of public finance for sustainable development.
Thank you very much. I was saying that...
The chairman of the event, Professor Akanipo, is practical with his examples as to reasons he believes policies are not making expected impacts.
The implementation of whatever is agreed upon and the coordination. For example, in our economy today, the current president has an economic team, so to say. But that team, there's a challenge because the team consists of ministers and private sector players. Okay? For example, the team, you have Otedola, you have Elubelu, you have Dangote, and so on and so forth, and you have ministers and some technocrats to discuss policy for the economy. That is inconsistent in terms of the way it should be, because the private sector should be a recipient of policy and not to be policy makers. We call that the macro time inconsistency.
Other realities, such as the mounting debt of the country after the relief received in 2005, the components of the GDP and how to improve the value, among other issues, were discussed, most of which have been captured in the essays in honor of Professor Ndubuisi Nwokoma.
And there are practice issues about government management of finance, about issue about Procurement Act. How do you spend money, granting of, giving up of contracts, so that there'll be efficiency in delivery for the ordinary man. So procurement issues, issues of revenue, issue of the budget, issues about the monetary consensus, or they're all in the book. We have policies in Nigeria, but if we don't adopt them, it will not work. It's like we have a very good pot of soup. Unless you eat, you will not get the benefit of that pot of soup.
The center is asking for close collaboration between the academia and policy makers for better implementation of ideas and strategies and a better outcome in the economy.
Приближается к нам. Напомню, что это Е1, это прямой эфир, это площадь 1905 года. Поздравляю всех с праздником. И поэтому надеюсь, что у вас хорошее настроение. Тоже пишите добрые, хорошие комментарии. Вспоминайте своих дедов и прадедов. И оп, все. Есть одна потерявшая туфельку. Ну, вот это такая традиция, друзья. Вот, видите, девушка оборачивается, потому что она идет босиком.
Shall we call her Cinderella? I'm talking about the female cadet who lost a pair of her shoes while participating in the victory parade in Moscow, but that didn't stop her. She kept marching barefoot without hindering the formation in Moscow's Red Square. Almost 2,000 servicemen and over 50 units of military hardware took part in the procession, but that didn't stop the cameraman who captured the moment and zoomed in on her feet.
Девушка оборачивается, потому что она идет босиком, потеряла свою левую туфельку. Но без этого никак, друзья. Приближается к нам. Напомню, что это Е1, это прямой эфир, это площадь 1905 года. Поздравляю всех.
Well, that's discipline right there. Are you hot? Then cool off. These African elephants in the Safari Park Zoo in India can be seen enjoying bath time and resting away from the sunshine. The elephants appeared to be all smiles as they were showered with cool water by workers amid the hot weather. Last week, temperatures rose to 40 degrees Celsius in Karachi, India. The Meteorological Department issued warnings of a heat wave as the city faced dry and hot weather. The temperature in the city was sitting at 31 degrees Celsius with 61% humidity. Weather forecasts show that the temperatures will continue to rise in the coming days. A bath is well needed indeed. A bath and a good meal. Well, that's the show today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Jacques Rogers.